Hi, this is Bryan Adkins, and I'd like to welcome you to the Leading Culture Change, an Introduction to the Denison Model and Tools. This presentation is designed to introduce people to Denison Consulting, what we do and how we do it, and particularly how we help organizations in the area of culture and leading change. The presentation today will focus on several things. We like to talk in terms of the what are we talking about when we talk about culture, and particularly the Denison model and how we examine organizations. The so what in terms of what difference does it make in terms of culture and the link to performance, and the now what, how do we take the information that we've learned and figure out how to move the needle and help organizations improve their performance. So let me start out by talking a little bit about Denison Consulting and just share with you a few words about us as an organization. The work that we do is based on research done by Dr. Daniel Denison. He originally started his work at the University of Michigan, continues to teach today, and is a professor of management at IMD in Lausanne, Switzerland. And the thing that or I should say one of the things that Dan is noted for is the creation of his culture model, and particularly coming up with a clear link between organizational culture and performance in organizations. And the work that Dan has done over the years has resulted in the creation of Denison Consulting and the firm that we have today. And our mission as an organization is to improve the performance of organizations by improving their culture and their leadership. And quite simply, we believe that if our clients are successful, then we will be successful. And that's the way we like to think about the work that we do. When I talk about issues and leadership issues in organizations, the thing is, probably the thing that we're most well known for is our Denison Organizational Culture Survey. We also have developed over the years a leadership development survey, a leadership 360 or multi-rater feedback survey. We also provide a wide range of consulting support around leadership development and organizational culture. We do that with some of our internal resources. We also have a broad network of consultants that we've worked with and have done projects with globally through the years that we can help bring into organizational settings. In addition to those sort of core offerings that I've just described, we also have our leadership development survey for individual contributors, so we refer to that one as the 270. We've also developed a tool that a number of organizations have found to be quite valuable, and that's our Change Monitor. The Change Monitor is a tool that organizations can use after they've done a culture survey or after they've done a leadership development survey that allows them to come back in a relatively brief period of time and check their progress in specific areas so that they can see if the actions they're taking are having the desired impact. In addition to the Change Monitor, we've also developed an action planning tool, which is an online tool that allows organizations to track and monitor their action planning processes. And then the last thing that I'll mention is our Denison Team 360. So we have a Denison Team 360 that allows teams to get feedback, both in terms of how they see themselves functioning as a team, but also from people who might be upstream or downstream from that team can provide feedback to that group as well. So those are some of the core offerings that we provide as an organization. I'd like to share with you, this slide here demonstrates or shows a number of clients who we work with or have done work with through the years. We've been fortunate enough to work with many, many organizations over the last decade or so. And here's some names that will obviously be familiar to you. One of the questions we often get at Denison is, what's the typical Denison client, or what's the typical reason why a client might choose to work with Denison Consulting. And I think as you look at this particular page, one of the things that's pretty striking is that there isn't really a typical Denison client. I mean, we work with government organizations, we work with technology companies, automotive companies, consumer products companies, oil, you name it. There's just airlines. There's a lot of different kinds of organizations that we've had the honor to work with throughout the years. One thing that I will say that they all have in common is they all have very lofty visions, goals, things that they're trying to achieve, but they also have a basic understanding that their culture will either serve their aspirations or will be the biggest barrier to success. And so they all have that in common with respect to understanding that culture is either going to help them achieve what they're trying to achieve, or it's going to become a pretty significant hurdle for them. I guess one other thing that I would just mention in terms of what do all these organizations have in common, and that is that they're changing, that they're experiencing change. They're either experiencing upswings, downswings, introducing new products, services. Every organization we go into today is experiencing a significant amount of change, and they're trying to better understand how those changes are impacting the human capital that they have in their organization and how their human capital is positioned to help them deal with the changes that they're going through. When I think about how we help organizations change, again, we often talk about the what, the so what, the now what. Very sort of in simplistic ways, I like to think of it as kind of a five-step process in which we help organizations understand, assess what their current organizational culture looks like or their current leadership strengths and weaknesses are. We use the data that we've gathered to help them create some common understanding of what is going on in the organization with respect to their human capital. We try to get them to a place where they're willing and ready to make a decision about what they now understand about their organization. Are they ready to make a shift, either as an individual leader, as a collective, or both? Of action planning, implementing actions, evaluating the impact of those actions, and making course corrections as needed. So it's a pretty straightforward process that we think about. So that's a little bit about Denison, who we are, and I want to share with you just a few thoughts about culture and then the Denison model in particular. When we think about culture, there are lots of I'll say academic and other definitions out there about culture, and they all tend to talk about things like shared values, shared beliefs, assumptions, practices, all of these things that have been learned, reinforced over time, or a lot of times we just talk about culture being the way things get done around here. So if I'm in an organization and I'm meeting with employees or talking, using the C word, the culture word, one of the things that I'll often say is anytime you hear me use the word culture, just think about the way things get done around here. And that usually gives people enough of a basic understanding about what we're trying to get at when we talk about organizational culture. But when we think about the way things get done around here, that can absolutely conjure up, hundreds, if not thousands, of areas that we could focus on or talk about inside an organization. And so one of the things that Dan Denison has done and that we at Denison Consulting have done is look at those aspects of culture that actually impact the way organizations perform. Because again, if you think about culture as the way things get done around here, there are a lot of things we could focus our energies on. And what Dan did in his research and what we continue to do in our ongoing research is try to focus on those aspects of culture that actually count, that actually impact the way an organization performs. And that's why when we show this slide here, we talk about what counts. What we've learned is that high-performing organizations tend to do four things pretty well. They tend to be pretty clear on their mission, where they're going, both short-term and long-term, why they exist, what their purpose is as an organization. They tend to have some consistency in their organization, so there's some predictability, some consistency that creates some leverage so that they can do things in a repetitive way, that there's employees, leaders experience things in somewhat of a consistent way inside the organization. They also tend to be pretty good at involvement, getting employees involved as they do the work that they're doing on a day-to-day basis. And they're also highly adaptive organizations. So they're listening to what's going on in the marketplace, they're observing what's happening in the world environment around them, and they're reacting to those changes. You'll notice as we look at those four areas that there are three ways that we measure each one of these cultural traits. So with respect to mission, we're trying to understand vision. Do they understand their long-term purpose? Do they have a strategic direction? So are they clear about what they're trying to focus on, priorities over the next 2, 3, 4 years? And do they have short-term goals and objectives that help employees connect what they're doing on a day-to-day basis to the strategy and ultimately the vision of the company? With consistency, we measure a few things as well. We're looking at balanced behavior. The ability to reach agreement, and particularly reach agreement around key business issues, is important and provides some consistency in organizations as problems arise. And the ability to coordinate and integrate their efforts. So we're concerned with an organization's ability to work across organizational boundaries. Not necessarily just how they work within their own team, but if they have to go to other regions, other functions, other levels in the organization, how effectively they do that. With the involvement piece, the three areas that we focus on there include empowerment, the degree to which employees feel informed, the degrees to which they feel like they have impact on the decisions that affect them, and basically their sense of can they make a difference in the work that they do on a day-to-day basis. We also look at team orientation, pretty straightforward in terms of do we value teamwork, do we create opportunities for people to work together in teams and see teamwork as the way to get things done. And capability development, are we investing in the skills and capabilities of our people so that they can contribute at a high level both today and in the future. And then finally, with adaptability, the three areas that we focus on there are creating change, and we specifically talk about creating change and are we looking for new and improved ways to do the work that we do? How receptive are people to new ideas in the workplace? We also look at customer focus, the degree to which people understand their customers, reach out to their customers, get feedback from their customers, and use that feedback to change and adapt the way that they do the work that they do. And then the last thing that we look at here is organizational learning. With organizational learning, I kind of describe that as at a high level, at a macro level, it's really, do we value learning as an organization? Do we see learning as an important part of the way that we do business? At a more of a micro level, it's, do we create an environment where people can take risks, try new things, and we learn from our mistakes as well as our successes? Sometimes in organizations that score low in the area of organizational learning, one of the words that I'll sometimes hear introduced is blame, that when things go wrong or things don't work out as we anticipated, the focus is much more on who's to blame or finger pointing as opposed to what can we learn from this and how can we move on as an organization. So this model, this Denison model, serves as the foundation for much, if not all, of the work that we do at Denison Consulting. There is one part of the model that sometimes gets overlooked that I'll just take a few seconds to mention, and that's this circle in the middle, this gray circle that says beliefs and assumptions. Those are things that are hard sometimes to measure and calibrate inside an organization, but this model and the diagnostics that we've created to go along with this do at least start to shine some light on these sometimes sensitive and sometimes unseen areas in an organization. So, for example, if an organization scores low on empowerment, and I've seen this play out where an organization will score low in an area like empowerment, and somebody will on the leadership team will raise their hand and say, well, it seems to me like what we need to do is train everybody on empowerment. And while that may seem like a logical and ultimately may actually even be an appropriate thing to do, it's often good to explore some underlying beliefs and assumptions to try to understand what might be driving a low score in empowerment. Because often you'll find out that there are some issues around trust, there are some issues around not believing employees have the skills they need or the motivation they need, the commitment they need, and therefore leaders don't trust them to make the decisions. And simply training people on empowerment doesn't necessarily address that belief and assumption and underlying issue there. So the belief, and of course, as I mentioned earlier, what's really important is that we're focusing on aspects of culture that impact how organizations perform. So it's less about, and absolutely not necessarily about, trying to create an environment where people are happy, where people just feel good about showing up to work every day. We think that that's great if people are happy and enjoy showing up to work for every day, but we also think it's really important that the culture they create helps them perform better. And so what you're seeing on this slide here in front of you now is that different aspects of culture tend to impact the way organizations perform in different ways. The top half of the model, adaptability and mission, seems to have a more significant impact on things like growth. We measure things like sales growth and market share. The bottom half of the model, the internally focused half of the model, involvement and consistency, seems to impact things like quality, employee satisfaction, the overall operating performance of an organization. The right-hand side of the model, the mission consistency, seems to have a stronger impact on things like stable, efficient performance over time. So we track things like return on investment, return on assets, return on sales. Because what you're seeing happening on the right-hand side of this model is a high level of alignment around where we're trying to go as an organization and how we're going to work together to get there. The result is a more stable, more efficient operation. The left-hand side of the model, adaptability and involvement, seems to have a stronger relationship to things like innovation and customer satisfaction. So it's about having employees who are talented, have the skills, capabilities that they need, they're collaborating, working together, they have the ability to have an impact on the work that they're doing, and they understand the marketplace and the customers that they're trying to serve, and therefore the result is a higher level of customer satisfaction and a higher level of innovation. One thing that I'll share with you is that while a lot of the work that we do involves doing surveys and diagnostic work, the model is an important centerpiece, if you will, for the work that we do. And I often encourage organizations to use the model, not just the survey. The model can help you as you think about projects you're working on, change initiatives you're trying to drive, just the basic workflow that you're doing in your organization. So you can sit back and you can ask yourself and you can ask your colleagues questions like, have we developed clear goals around this initiative? Have we connected the goals to our long-term strategies? Who else do we need to coordinate our efforts with? Have we reached agreement regarding some of the key priorities that we're trying to work on? Have our team members been involved? Do we have the skills that we need? How will this effort better serve our customers? What do we need to change? What are we learning as we go through this process? So the model itself can serve as a real valuable tool in addition to just the diagnostics that we provide as well. When we do conduct a survey and when we do provide the diagnostic support, we benchmark organizations and leaders. When survey results are presented, you'll see a pattern of colors, you'll see percentile scores. If it's a culture survey, it's because we're benchmarking your organization against a database that has currently 888 organizations in it. If it's Leadership 360, we're benchmarking your data against a database that has information from over 8,000 leaders. And the leadership and organizational culture databases represent pretty broad range of industries, countries, because one of the things that we've learned is that the variances from industry to industry, country to country, are relatively minimal. We'll see a lot of variances within an organization as we compare one region to another, one function to another, etc. But on average, a high-performing organization in the technology industry looks very much like a high-performing organization in consumer products or transportation, and a high-performing organization in Asia looks very much like a high-performing organization in Europe or the U.S. But we do use this database. We tell people that when you look at your survey results, more color is better. So you can see we've got a profile of a high-performing organization up top, sort of an average-performing organization in the middle, and a lower-performing organization at the bottom. You can tell, you can make some pretty interesting insights about an organization just by looking at that circumplex, that initial profile that we get when we collect data about an organization or a leader. Just to give you a quick example, here's a sample organization. This was a technology company on the decline. What you're seeing here is that they had just over 1,200 employees respond to a survey. And now you're starting to see that in things like vision, where it says 14th percentile, that's compared to that database of 888 organizations. So they scored better than 14% of the organizations in our database. This particular organization, it mentions that they were a technology company on the decline. One of the things that's important when you look at this data is to notice the patterns here, because what a lot of people will initially do is just kind of go around the wheel and say, okay, low in vision, a little higher on goals, low in strategy, low in consistency, a little bit better in involvement. But as you start to work with this model, you'll start to see and experience that there are some connections and linkages that you can often make here. So, for example, when an organization is lower in vision and strategy and is not clear about what their priorities are for the future, and even what their ultimate purpose is, why they exist as an organization, they start to become very short-sighted. They start to do things in a very reactive way. They get a little bit better at setting short-term goals and objectives. In this case, stronger sense of team orientation. But as you work with this organization, some of the things that you learn is that what they do is they bring together teams to basically react to problems that customers are having. And very little gets done in this organization with any thought for the future. It's all about putting out fires and reacting to today's problems and bringing people together to resolve the current issues. And without a sense for the future about where we're going, what our priorities are, it's hard to know what capabilities to develop. It's hard to know how we would create change, because change has to be towards something as opposed to change just for change's sake. What do we coordinate? In addition to the circumplex, and they could get this data for their overall organization. They can see it by geographies, by functions, by levels, etc., whatever demographics are of interest to them. They also get the line item data, so they get to see how they scored on each item from the survey. This again is this technology company that was on the decline, and I'm just showing you the adaptability piece. So there's 5 questions for creating change, there's 5 for customer focus, there's 5 for organizational learning. And so what we're seeing here is the specific items that make up those cultural indices that give people a little bit more granularity, a little bit more detail. You'll recall that I said this seems to be an organization that reacts to the customer. they actually scored pretty high. Two of their highest scoring items were customer comments lead to changes, customer input directly influences our decisions. But if you look at, do our members have a deep understanding of the customer? Not really. Do the interests of the customer get ignored in our decisions? Yep, seems like sometimes that happens. Do we encourage direct contact with our customers by our people? Not really. So the things that are more proactive in terms of reaching out and trying to understand the customer we're weak on. When a customer does comment or when a customer does provide input, though, we'll react to that. So again, this just gives you an example of what the data might look like. And the data is used in a lot of different settings for a lot of reasons in organizations, one of which is in mergers, where you can actually get profiles of two companies that are coming together or that have come together. And you can use this data for integration teams, for leadership teams to look at and proactively manage where they think some of the challenges might be as they bring two or more organizations together. It's also important to think about leaders and the leader's impact on the culture of an organization. One of my favorite quotes from Edgar Schein's book about organizational culture and leadership is, that the bottom line for leaders is that if they do not become conscious of the cultures in which they are embedded, those cultures will manage them. Cultural understanding is desirable for all of us, but it is essential to leaders if they are to lead. So leaders find a lot of value in the culture data that we collect, and along the way we found that it was really important for leaders to also get some personal feedback about their impact on the organizations that they lead. So we've created the Leadership 360, and just like with the culture survey, we provide leaders with a circumplex. It allows them to see their self-rating. It allows them to see the combined other ratings. It goes into a lot more detail. It breaks it out by direct reports, bosses, others. They get the line item data just like they would with a culture survey. But it allows the individual leader to see how well they are doing things like developing organizational capability, building team orientation, creating shared vision in the organization. So while you can have groups and collective parts of the organization addressing what they're learning from their culture data, the individual leaders can also look at their personal impact and come up with some actions that they want to take based on their own personal feedback. The question is always, so what? What are the implications? And I mentioned earlier the links to performance with this model. And there's a lot of ways that link is established, both in the initial research that we've done, as well as the ongoing research that we do at Denison Consulting. So, for example, here's a study that was done a couple of years ago where we looked at return on shareholders' equity. And what you see here is the result of a study with 161 publicly traded companies, broad range of industries. And you're looking at the contrast between those organizations, the 10% of organizations that had the best culture scores, which you see on the right-hand side, and the 10% of organizations that had the lowest culture scores reflected on the left-hand side. And you look at those return on equities, 6% versus 21%. Very clear in terms of, where would you want to invest your dollars, and very clear as you're talking to senior leaders in organizations to help them see in a very real way that, again, we're talking about culture as a business issue, as something that impacts the way an organization performs. We've also been doing some recent research in the area of innovation. Innovation is one of the more challenging areas to get some feedback and to track and relate to culture. But one of the things we recognized is that actually the marketplace does a pretty good job of assessing how innovative they think an organization might be by the value that they put on an organization based on future growth. If you look at what we're looking at, this slide here represents the market value attributed to future growth of about 26% for the organizations on the left. So the marketplace is looking at these organizations and not necessarily thinking that there's a lot of future growth potential here. Only about a quarter of their market value is attributed to future growth versus those organizations that you see on the right. Lots of color, strong cultures, and, oh, by the way, about 65% of their market value is attributed to future growth. So the market does a pretty good job of making some assessments about innovation and the future growth potential of organizations. We've also seen organizations who take their culture data and link it to other things, activities going on inside their organization. So in this case, we've got automotive dealers across the U.S., and what they did is they collect data from a thing called the CSI, a Customer Satisfaction Index, and they just created a profile of those dealerships and regions that were getting below 50% highly satisfied against those that were getting above 80% highly satisfied customers, and looking at what the cultural differences are there. And this internal benchmarking, if you will, can be a real valuable tool because it provides extremely credible benchmarking data for those dealerships who are getting above 80% highly satisfied, can go out to and work with those organizations, those dealerships that are getting below 50%, and give them very specific examples, practices, behaviors of things that they're doing in their organization that might help those that are underperforming in the area of customer satisfaction. Obviously, once the data has been collected, the question becomes, now what? How do we move the needle? How do we help organizations perform? And we think, moving the needle is important because, as one of our friends and colleagues at Harvard once said, just because you get on the scale doesn't mean you will lose weight. And we're very aware of that at Denison. We know that the diagnostic, having a good model and having some good diagnostics that go with that is an important part of the battle, but it's not the end of the battle. That once you've gotten that data, you've got to know what you're going to do with it. And so, as we talked about earlier, it's important to have a good action planning process in place. It's important to look at your data, and that can be culture data, leadership data, and other data that you may have collected along the way through focus groups, interviews, performance data about the organization. Identify the gaps and figure out what needs to change, and then build the team. Who's going to lead the change? Who are going to be those people who are going to help drive the changes that you need in the organization? And get as many people involved in the change process as you possibly can. And let those people come together, create a vision for what do we want this organization to look like in the future, what's the desired culture that we think we need to drive the performance that we need in this organization, and come up with some very specific actions for how they're going to move that organization forward. And then, as I mentioned earlier in this presentation, it becomes a very straightforward process of taking action, assessing those actions, tracking progress, what's working, what hasn't worked yet, what course corrections do we need to make, and then we can come back a year later, 18 months later, assess the organization again. One of the things I mentioned is this notion of doing focus groups, or we like to refer to them as action/focus groups, because one of the things we've learned is that the culture data and the leadership data will shed light on many issues in the organization, the group, or for that particular leader. But sometimes there's issues that arise for which additional information would be useful. So what we find is that it's often helpful to conduct these action/focus groups to, A, better understand some of those issues for which there still may be some lingering questions or lack of clarity. And most importantly, and this is where the action part of the action focus group comes in, is to generate the action plans for moving the organization, group, or leader forward with the maximum amount of buy-in. We've all, I think, probably been a part of or participated in or led focus groups where they become, an hour, 2 hours of people complaining and voicing their concerns about all the problems that exist in an organization. And our belief in what we've seen be successful in organizations is transitioning the creation of greater understanding into a conversation about, okay, if it's a year from now and we're doing a better job of coordination and integration, what's different in our organization? What are we doing differently? Give me some of these specific examples of actions that we would have taken that would make us better at coordination and integration. And so the focus becomes very much about solutions. We, like a lot of organizations that do the kind of work that we do, we get to work with a lot of different organizations, leaders, people from different industries, sectors, etc. And so, over the years now, we've seen a lot, and we've seen organizations who did nothing. So you see a survey, a culture survey, year 1, year 2, where you see very little change, and in fact maybe some downward trends in a couple of areas. And what we've also seen is that the same organization absolutely nothing with the data when they received it in year 1. We've also seen organizations who make some really dramatic shifts. In this case, about a 5-year change in terms of the culture here, and associated performance shifts, increases, in this case, a healthcare organization where you're seeing increased patient satisfaction, you're seeing increases in the variety of services that they offer to their patients that they serve. You're seeing increased employee satisfaction, increased customer satisfaction scores, greater revenues, all of those things that are important beyond just seeing the growth in the color from 99 to 2004. What's even more common, I guess, would be what we would call focused improvement. Organizations who start out, they get their data, they've got some strengths, they've got some areas of weakness, they've got some places where they're average, they pick a few areas that they want to focus on, and so they build out, in this case, their vision, their strategy. And as they increase their vision and strategy, they get better at reaching agreement. They get better at developing the capabilities they need to achieve that vision, that strategy. So, what I would call more of a focused improvement approach. We've also seen leaders from a 360 perspective who have received some pretty critical feedback. In this case, you're looking at a leader whose self-rating looks quite positive on the left. A bit more critical on the right in terms of the feedback that they've gotten from those around them, peers, direct reports, bosses, etc. And we've also seen leaders who have owned their results and actually did something about it. This is a leader whose combined scores on the left-hand side were their most recent scores, and on the right-hand side was results they had received about a year prior. And rather than sort of rationalize it away or suggest that their peers, direct reports, their boss just didn't get them, they actually took the process pretty seriously. And they reached out to their peers, their direct reports, and their boss for feedback about what they could do differently, how they could be more effective in their role, and got much stronger feedback in terms of their leadership effectiveness. And in addition, that was reflected in the data that you see in front of you here. As we wind down here, one of the things that's often asked is, so what's different about the clients who seem to have success using your model and your tools versus those clients who are less successful? And one of the things certainly that I've noticed is that our successful clients connect with the Denison model. The model makes sense to them. We don't spend a lot of time debating the importance of empowerment or the importance of creating change, or is it really that critical that we be able to on an organization. They also see culture as a business issue, that they recognize it can either be a competitive advantage or it will be their Achilles heel, and therefore they give it the attention that it deserves. And I guess last but not least would be this focused, sort of relentless pursuit of improvement in performance. They they want to improve, they want to get better, they want to continue to do what they do in a more effective way. And so they get their survey results either as leaders or as organizations, and they focus on what can we do to get better. And the process they use for doing that is, again, goes back to our, create the common understanding, set priorities, create some action teams, and have leaders who view these activities as critical to their ongoing business success. So that's a quick review of the Denison model, how it shows up in organizations, how the culture survey, the leadership surveys are utilized. We hope that as you start to think about the Denison model and the diagnostics, that you'll have questions for us, or that you'll want to learn more about what it is that we do. We certainly welcome those. There's a couple of emails that you're certainly welcome to contact myself, Bryan Adkins, our Global Sales Director, Nabil Susu, and there's our contact information, our phone number, where you can reach us at our offices in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So please, if you have additional questions or thoughts that you'd like to explore with us, feel free to contact us. And we certainly appreciate your taking the time to spend with us, and look forward to hearing from you soon. Thanks.